Consider Paramahansa's life for a moment. You're born into a well-off family. It's well-off because Dad is a CEO of a railway company in a desperately poor country, impoverished by British rule, taxation and restrictions that turned the Indian economy into the greatest export nation of manufactured goods into an export nation of raw materials to the dominant empire of the British. The family is large in terms of numbers of children, well, from a modern Western point of view anyway. I think there's about 6 of them. And Mum dies when Paramahansa is 11 years old. My experience of Indian mums in culture, they're relatively severe to what I experience of my mum. You know, my mum wanted to see me as a friend. She wanted to be a friend to me, not a mum. So he's living in a family where he's not the eldest, so he's dominated by an inexperienced older brother, you see, as opposed to lovely parents. Dad is a CEO. That's not the mark of a railway company. It's not the mark of the most human understanding sort of person. He's distant. He's a very logical male mind. Not brute male, the sort of drinking tough of Western society. It's an Indian man of integrity, but a man of integrity rather than warm human love. And Mum, however loving she was, in fact, so to speak, relative to what we think of ladies, when you have a number of children and so on, and staff, and it's a different world, isn't it? You then lose Mum, and all you've got is Dad and a dominant older brother and sisters who are in that culture. I mean, women have an inferior role from a Western point of view. So he's absolutely desperate when he loses Mum. Goes each day and sits under a tree down the garden, depressed to say the least. I mean, I suspect just wants to die. So he has a childhood that speaks of a tremendous need for love and warmth. And his dad, of course, with a sort of integrity and loyalty, refuses to bring any other woman into the house that's going to minister to him. Which means, therefore, not much ministry to the children either. And of course, being a CEO and as time goes by, he spends more time in any of his free time in meditation in the house, which is sort of seclusion, isn't it? I suspect he spent very little time with his children, which meant that their life comes to be dominated by the older children. Life's not ideal, except it's affluent. So we find in that religious culture of that society that Paramahansa comes to see God very much as Divine Mother. And psychologically the loss of Mum at 11 and longing for her must have been terrible for him. Look, if we're talking about an incarnating avatar, he's an extraordinary boy. From a hindsight point of view, he's clearly destined for the spiritual life. And at the time, clearly his dad's not seeing him, still expecting him to be following his own footsteps in the railroad company. I mean, really. There's not much understanding really from Dad. Man of integrity and so on, but not of human interaction and love in our understanding of it. Psychologically, I think I would say it's a really rotten childhood. And whatever else an incarnating avatar might be, this one clearly doesn't understand his exalted spiritual state. Now you could say, well, all avatars come into the world still with a largely blank slate, not understanding life, not understanding who they are even. In which case, becoming an adult on the planet again, I mean a human adult in this world, at what point do you start to really have an avatar's understanding, enlightenment, mind and powers? He experiences miracles as a child, and that's taken to be by himself and the people around him, including, of course, his biographer later, Kriyananda, his disciple of the last 4 years of his life. Which is taken to be mark of his exalted spiritual nature. But from the world's point of view, the unusual, especially in India, is very typically taken to be evidence of the very spiritual, whereas we would take such as being a misfit and a marginal of society. And from a secular point of view in the modern world, we'd say a religious nutter. In other words, we wouldn't be impressed, we'd be very suspicious of the unusual, and that includes the miraculous. Whereas in what we would term as a superstitious culture, they interpret such as, in that culture, the people of that culture interpret such as holiness. Now, like the story of Jesus, the miracles associated with Paramahansa and the amazing powers are everything to the autobiography. And really to Kriyananda's view of his guru Paramahansa, all the more magical really, because it's of a culture that's not Kriyananda's, for instance. You know, Kriyananda's culture is Caucasian, American. Well, yeah, Caucasian, I mean European too. Kriyananda's dad was business again, very successful in an oil company, representing the company abroad in Europe. So Kriyananda gets much time in a different culture. More the Mediterranean culture. But is technically American by origin, and finds America a bit alienating compared to his childhood in Europe. Is himself alienated from his childhood environment by being shunted off to boarding schools around Europe, including England. And was it in England? Public school type place anyway. And yeah, and then going to live in America in the later years of his youth. Now, losing a parent or two in India is not unusual, of course. But Paramahansa's lifestyle is not typical. You know, it's very affluent and protected in some sense, materially. And I can think of myself in that mine was affluent. I don't mean I was spoiled with material things, but financially there were no worries at all. And Dad had a respected business, manager of stockbrokers' occupation and private family wealth. But I had a mum, and I had all her attention. She didn't even share her attention with Dad. It was me that was the one that was loved. And Dad was again this distant, man of integrity, business. Both Kriyananda and Paramahansa don't see business as evil, which I did, and Mum did. Business is just driven by self-interest and is ruthless in how it deals with people, and is part of the adopted lifestyle of the elite who used to exploit by owning all the land, but then shifted to owning all the means of production as well. I come from a subculture that hates the elites, that looks at a magnificent building like a pyramid or a castle and says, who are the poor sods that built it and died building it? I'm not impressed. Do you see? What Mum is impressed with for me was the exoticness of India, and in particular its sort of strange religion, which in her mind was blended with Tibet and wonder workers. And miracles in that sense, rather than miracles of the Christian culture of Jesus-type miracles. Look, I have to say, I don't find Paramahansa a perfect man. I find him quite wonderful in many ways, but with feet of clay, like all of us. In other words, I don't find him an incarnation of God. I don't find Jesus to be a literal man of history. And I don't find Paramahansa's image, especially as portrayed by a servilely, utterly devoted disciple like Kriyananda, to be valid. I find not Kriyananda much at all, but Paramahansa to be an elitist again when it comes to religion. I mean, all his minions round him are in utter obedience. And of course Paramahansa has a view of himself which is exalted, by which I don't just mean loved of God, but privileged of God in enormous ability to engineer certainly what others see as miracles. And he has a model of leadership which is the guru lording it over everyone under him, spiritually speaking. It's utterly repellent to like my background of rebellion against this world's elites. And when I say rebellion, I don't mean I therefore want to bring about the chaos of something like the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution. But I do want a love and care of certainly human life. I was a humanist before I became someone who wanted to believe in God. And I suppose my reluctance to want to believe in God before was very much fueled by the fact that elites are anything but noble. They're exploitive and unkind. And God is just a spiritual version of a physical elite that rules and dominates. Rather than truly rescues. Certainly I would have seen the character, and did see the character of Jesus as in the story, as an enlightened man who refused to be part of the elites and went around caring for people. So I was not alienated by the story of Jesus, except to the extent it was probably make-believe. You know, miracles were not something that were my experience. Unloving affluence was. And Mum coming from a poor background of society. Love was part of my experience. Paramahansa clearly feels that love from his mum was part of his experience too. But I wonder if it wasn't heavily painted in terms of the way Indian women run families. Not good from my point of view of the experience of my mum. But if you've nothing else, probably good from Paramahansa's point of view. So I see Paramahansa from this point of view. And the biographical information, not just of Kriyananda, but also of the young lady who helps him in his last few years, personal assistant, I forgot the name for a minute. I'll put it in here, I'll leave a space.
Narayana and Naya.
Their comments, you could say, well, they're imperfect compared to the great master, but they betray a subconscious criticism that perhaps we all have coming from Western society, Europe, Caucasian, having suffered elites through an enlightenment period of history as well. We are the consequence of a cynicism, and you can see in their accounts that really their view of the master, Paramahansa, is nothing like as good as Paramahansa's view. of himself. I mean, he's the great and favoured disciple of the greatest guru that was really available on the planet at the time of his childhood, who was similarly not the chief disciple. Yukteswar, Paramahansa's disciple, was not the chief disciple of Lahiri, but at least was a major disciple of Lahiri, and gained a fair reputation for being such in a way, or at least one of the major ones, yeah. And Lahiri supposedly, and I did feel it was supposedly linked to this mythical character of Babaji, who lives forever on the planet and, materializes palaces for and what have you. I mean, and so many of the miracles are as absurd as the Christian Jesus miracles. And when I say absurd, I mean really absurdly exceptional rather than absurdly not feasible. I believe miracles like walking on water or materializing palaces are possible, but dare I say it, they're spiritual floss compared to what spirituality is supposed to be about, which is the utter goodness of love, of loving kindness, of care. And of course I have a view that true spirituality is of love. And integrity. As Paramahansa's is one of, well, certainly Kriyananda, by the very name, of course, Ananda, joy, is one of joy and servility, integrity in that way. I suppose my view is that God is integrity to us. Great loyalty. Whereas the Paramahansa view and Kriyananda and so on seems to be of great servile loyalty of us to God and integrity in it. My view is what I feel to be an enlightened understanding of the Jesus teaching, which is that our salvation turns on the love and integrity of God, whereas the Paramahansa view seems to still be that our relationship turns on our servility to God and our integrity in doing so. So you end up with a religion yet again of works and of great toil, perhaps a trillion incarnations, perhaps just a lot of Kriya Yoga and utter dedication in this life, compared to my understanding of the Jesus drift, which is that it turns on God's love and steadfastness to us, despite us being, well, pretty wayward children, of course, even prodigals. In a strange way, then, I see this semi-Christian view that I have as being far more love-based. Than Paramhansa approach and Indian approach, which seems to be very much obedience-based still. It's more in the frame, for my mind, of Judaic religion in that way. It's going to be by works. It's not going to be by the kindness and charity of God, only as far as forgiveness, and that you lose your ego, lose your identity. I'm brought up by a mum who very much loves you as you are, and yes, holds absolute vision for what wonderful person you could be. But is certainly not requiring you to simply model her. She really has come that you have life. And in my mum's case, I think probably driven by a horrible guilt that she didn't somehow have the opportunity to look after me for the first 5 years of life. Most of it. I mean, 90% of it. Because of adoption, 100 miles away from where she lived with Dad. And then a year and a half in hospital with TB that I had. My having mum from the age of 5 continuously onwards, by comparison to the first 5 years of not having her, may well have, almost certainly was the reason for the incredible strong bonding between me and Mum. I'd got what I needed, I guess, someone who loved me, and of course her devotion, perhaps in guilt as well. I mean, the bond was extraordinary, and a female bond, so I was brought up more a consequence of the female bond by far than Paramahansa experienced. So his view of God is not helped by having the dominant persons in his life to be company's CEO and older, immature brother, of course, who thinks he's mature, like we all do when we're teenagers and so on, in a culture that supports that too. I'm quite simply struck by the way avatars, gurus in particular, lord it over their subjects and demand a servile, ego-destroying attitude from such as well. That's not life, that's survival in a desperate culture. It sees riches and privilege as something you must be attached to survive. And when it comes to being truly attached to God, you take a role of utter poverty, living in a cave, in seclusion. Again, you throw yourself on an utter dependence on God's provision and hope to God it is miraculously there. And it's probably there more mythically than in reality. Do I really think Babaji is living in a cave somewhere in the Himalayas? No. And why would he anyway? What's the point in spending year after year sitting in a cave when you apparently are so enlightened you can live far more in heaven? What the body's doing would be a bit irrelevant, wouldn't it? And appearing so infrequently to your spiritual minions beneath you, like Paramahansa and so forth, and Kriyananda and so on, is not my idea of being loved and cared for. My understanding of God's love is that it's very continuous. I mean, it's like my mum's view of her love. You live with her and you're everything to her, and you just rest in her company, not long for her company. Spending all your life really longing for outstanding experiences of Krishna or Babaji or even your guru being encouraging to you. You know, it's extremely infrequent. These gurus are severe from a point of view of not being very loving. You know, in the case of Babaji, he's only going to turn up 2 or 3 times in your life. And Paramahansa probably only talks to Jesus once or twice, you know. They all treat death as horrendous. An enlightened being who knows God doesn't treat death as horrendous. He has the assurance, blessed assurance. I don't mean this isn't far too much for a secular person to contemplate. I mean, they're just desperate when they lose mum or... Obviously, I mean, and our heart goes out to them. We know exactly how they feel. Well, I hope so. In a sense, I hope so, you know what I mean? We can empathise, truly. But if you're an enlightened being, surely you have the victory from the very beginning. Because you know in some spiritual sense, and it's a sense that matters to you only, everything is good, all right. It's in the hands of God, for goodness sake. Everything, every thought, every atom, is his thought. He's running the show. Blessed assurance. Do you see? So I see Paramahansa's religion not scoring too well in humanitarian relationship love terms. I see Kriyananda's view as dominated by destroying the ego and taking refuge in joy. Ananda, unbelievable joy. And perhaps saying unbelievable then was a bit too near the mark. And what I actually may mean is not valued so much. I'm not looking for ecstatic joy. I'm looking for a loving relationship with simply wonderful person of God and those that similarly are in harmony with him. It's a state of being. It's not just a spiritual equivalent of happiness. There is great joy and peace. I don't particularly see the notion of joy as quite consistent with the notion of peace. Joy is more associated with excitement. How much thrilling to the quick do you need? Whereas love and devotion is a transcendence of being. It's not that joy is the dominant aspect. It's assurance and, well, it's just perfect company. It's relationship. Yes, it's integrity again and all those qualities of God. But it's Jesus, I have called you friends. I'm still more struck by the Jesus story than an avatar. I can't be bought. Or should I say I'm not bought anyway? I'm possibly proud of not being bought and cynical. The English are so cynical. They had such a bad time with elites. You know the way the British treated the natives, you know, the inferior people abroad. They treated their poor like that too. We were the abominable face of civilization. So abominable that you almost value the uncivilized more. You know, in some ways the uncivilized are more godly than the civilized. We kill on a horrendous scale. I found only recently that we were not just responsible for impoverishing India and the third world. and destroying it, especially with our diseases rather than our military might. But we starved them to death too. Possibly 100 million or more, could be 200 million. In that period, 1880 to 1920, at least 100 million Indians died of starvation and disease because of the famine that we engineered. The British. We are the most savage civilization that has ever been on the earth. I say we. I don't own it, thank God. The poor of such societies are as much a victim as the oppressed foreigner. Our elites were the epitome of being unloving. They only cared for the deserving poor. In other words, the poor that were so servile and self-effacing that you could rely on them to be loyal despite your abominable leadership. And I don't wish to have a God that's like that either. I'm not rebelling against God. I'm rebelling against an utterly corrupt view of God that looks straight past his epitome of loveliness, of kindness and care, to seeing a dominant elite being whom all creation is to humbly serve. Damn your view of God. Damn your view of the destruction of the ego. Damn your view of the crushing of the personality and the uniqueness of every being. Damn the way you walk in the paths of your corrupt elite in the world. My God has nothing to do with such. And I can only love my God. How could I possibly love yours? That's a nonsense. Okay, I've got carried away here. Come on, Marshall, come back to 21st century normalcy. I don't think much of the obedience approach to religion, and I'm not quite persuaded of the joy approach either. My experiences of my relationship with Mum, who wanted above all to be my best friend. Loyalty are staggering. Not to Dad, of course. Oh, goodness. Although, in large measure, faithful. To Dad. I don't think Mum actually had affairs. I mean, she might have had one or two in the end. But she did well, especially for a woman who could have any man on the planet. She was extremely good looking. She made most of Hollywood look like domestic servants. You know, not majoring in exotic attraction. Mum was beauty queen at 15 and was every man's dream in the Second World War as regards beautiful woman when you're a soldier. And you might lose your life being a soldier too, and probably many of them did, of course. Mum would have been your dream of, oh, if only one could have a girl like that. And she was my mum. God dear, she spent an hour putting her face on. She spent 3 or 4 hours preparing for a big evening function, like a ball, officer's ball, going with Dad. Yeah. Let me pause. We rehear this. Wow, I would have had no idea that this was 51 minutes long to this point in the recording. I've just said the whole thing straight off. I must be the most awful bore at times, to some people at least. Terrible, it's not my view of myself, is it? I'm supposed to be the enlightened lecturer who definitely doesn't push my listeners to more than 20 minutes, half an hour. And even that only in a situation where they expect to listen only to me. Not in normal conversation. That's a nightmare, isn't it? A person who only talks and doesn't listen. If I wasn't so assured of God, I would give up on you, Marshall. Thank you, Dad.